The Australian curriculum highlights the importance of learning and developing fundamental movement skills throughout the early years of schooling. The curriculum describes these as the foundation movements or precursor patterns to more specialised complex skills in games, sport, dance, gymnastics, physical recreation activities. They provide the foundation for human movement, competent and confident participation in a range of physical activities. The complete list of these fundamental movement skills are as follows. Firstly, the skills that fall into the locomotor and non-locomotor skill categories are rolling, balancing, sliding, jogging, running, leaping, jumping, hopping, dodging, galloping, skipping, floating, and moving through bodies of water safely. The skills that are in the category of object control skills are throwing, catching, kicking, and striking.
From a physiological perspective, these fundamental movement skills can be broken down into various components when planning for and implementing the learning and teaching of them. I will discuss the breakdown of these components in more detail for the selected skills before Lenny demonstrates her attempts at them. From a psychological, social and cultural perspective, gaining competence in fundamental movement skills can have a huge impact on a child's overall health, both in the short and long term. As stated by the Department of Western Australia, people that are competent in most fundamental motor skills are able to participate in a wide variety of activities throughout their lives. They have a higher self-esteem and self-confidence, also more willing to take risks. All of which are obvious psychological benefits. It also mentions that they are more popular with their playmates in the school grounds, shows social benefits, and just overall more likely to maintain an active and healthy lifestyle. It goes on to mention how children who have not become proficient in fundamental movement skills are less likely to join playground games. They have a lower self-esteem, lower self-confidence, and frequently try to avoid physical activities. Consequently, this can compromise their muscle and bone development, reduce fitness potential, and also opportunities for developing social competence. With an active lifestyle so embedded in the Australian culture, and being the overall goal for any physical education program, it's vital that all students are given the opportunity and sufficient time to learn and gain competence in these skills. Also, as these skills set the foundation for and carry over to so many other different sports and physical activities, successful involvement in any PE program relies on students firstly gaining competence in fundamental movement skills.
Throughout the remainder of this video, I will be concentrating on just 3 of the fundamental movement skills, which will be throwing, kicking, and catching. The performer I have chosen is Lenny, who is a grade 1 student. I have chosen a student of her age in order to demonstrate the level that a 6-year-old may be at throughout their development in fundamental movement skills. I'll be identifying what her strengths and weaknesses are throughout the 3 chosen fundamental movement skills and some possible ways of reinforcing her strengths and rectifying her weaknesses. So starting here with the throwing skill, here is a list of the broken down components that are mentioned in the Get Skilled, Get Active booklet, which is a resource to support the teaching of fundamental movement skills issued by the New South Wales Department of Education and Training back in the year 2000. So the skills are having eyes focused on the target area throughout the throw, standing side on to the target area, throwing arm follows through, down and across the body, throwing arm moves in a downward and backward arc, stepping towards target area with the foot opposite to the throwing arm, and having hips, then shoulders, rotate forward. The first 3 components are introductory components, and it's mentioned that children should be demonstrating proficiency in these by the end of year 1, with the rest of components being fine-tuned by the end of year 4. Lenny was instructed to simply take a few steps towards the line and throw the ball, so this is an indication of how she would perform the throw without any other advice on what she should be concentrating on. So we can see that out of the introductory components, which is what Lenny should be aiming for by the end of this school year, she was successful with the first component, keeping her eyes focused on the target area. We see that Lenny was facing front on to the target area instead of side on when she delivered the throw, which also meant she did not step towards the target area with the foot opposite the throwing arm. Even though she was in front on, she was still able to follow through down and across the body with the throwing arm after she released the ball. Lenny's arm was in front of her body when approaching towards and making the throw, so there was no sign of any downward or backward arc by her arm before making the throw. As Lenny was front on throughout the throw, her hips and shoulders did not rotate before the throw. For the purpose of this analysis, I'll indicate her strengths in green font. And I don't want to say weaknesses, as these are just components that are still yet to be taught and practiced by a student of her age, but the components that still need to be worked on are indicated in the red font.
When planning the teaching of the throwing skill, it's not recommended to pair it up with the catching skill at the same time. The reason for this is that while learning the proper techniques, children should be concentrating on velocity rather than accuracy, so pairing it up with catching at the same time would put the catcher in danger. Throwing for accuracy should only be practiced once the initial throwing technique has been taught and practiced. Children will need to learn to throw with as much force as possible to really emphasise the importance of components such as rotation of the hips and shoulders and the proper arm movements both before and after the object is released. When learning to throw, it's important to mix up the size and weight of the objects that are being thrown. This will allow children to get the feel of how the varying weight and diameter can regulate the throwing distance and speed. This can also help with safety by using things that will not rebound off the throwing target, like throwing beanbags at a wall target rather than balls. The object being thrown should not exceed the size of what the child is able to grasp with their fingers, rather than the palm, as this would promote improper technique.
The next step for Lenny to learn would be to be facing side on to the target area while delivering the throw. It would be a good idea here to have her experiment with different foot, shoulder and hip movements, so she is really able to get the feel of how it would benefit her to be standing side on, stepping towards the target and rotating her hips and shoulders. While doing this, I could be providing feedback during the various technique attempts and really highlighting how she was able to perform better when she throws while using the proper techniques. By highlighting and concentrating on one component at a time and then building on that until the whole sequence is performed correctly would benefit Lenny a great deal throughout this process. Providing Lenny with a visual cue of where to place her feet while throwing would help her with facing side on and stepping towards the target with her opposite foot. Here we use tape on the ground, or something like a squeaky toy would work, where she needs to step on it with her left foot before making the throw. Practicing rocking backwards and forwards while lifting and placing the front foot while throwing would be a good way to practice the need to step forward with the opposite foot to the throwing arm. With active play and minor games being a focus area in the Australian curriculum for students of Lenny's age, she would need to be given opportunities to practice and develop her throwing skills while being involved in active play and minor games throughout her PE lessons. A good example of a fun game that utilises the throwing skill could be a golf course style game where the player would have to throw an object towards the hoop that is placed anywhere around the playground. The course can be created and changed by the player. A whole course could be created and the game could be played by just one player or up to a whole class.